Hey guys, it's Dad. Thanks for joining me for part 4 of a 5-part series on World of Warcraft v Final Fantasy XIV. We'll continue with the next set of categories, starting with economy. As far as getting in-game currency, in my experience, one game gives more simply by leveling. When leveling in Warcraft, you'll make a chunk of gold for sure and have enough to buy flying skills, food, and some level-appropriate gear, if you don't have heirlooms, and have spending money left over. But over in FF14, I had almost enough to buy a small house by leveling to 80. The primary currency builder in WoW is going to be professions, gathering ore and flowers, or crafting gear and pets and putting them on the auction house. The same goes for Final Fantasy, but they have one extra place to make some extra money. By heading to the Firmament, a quest line will unlock Ishgardian Restoration and allow you to take part in fetes. You do need a gathering or crafting job to take part in these. Fetes are a series of activities that take place on certain days at certain times. Follow the mob of players from one activity to the other and get presents that when opened can provide a chance at rare items like mounts and glamour pieces. The plus side is that all these items can be sold on the market board, and the more fetes you do, you'll get a special currency to buy from vendors to get more glamours and dyes, which sell pretty well. While in the same location, you can unlock the Diadem, which is a special gathering zone, which gives materials that can only be used for recipes for the Ishgardian Restoration. This is an easy way to level professions, but the reason this is relevant to currency is that the more recipes you complete, you'll fill out scratch cards. Complete a scratch card and you'll have a chance at rare materials to sell on the market board. So although many glamours on the market board could be quite pricey, you do have this well-known secret to make some extra cash. Now the elephant in the room is obtaining in-game currency through third-party websites. Both games have these sites and purchasing from them is a bannable offense, so don't do it. One thing Warcraft offers, for better or worse, is the WoW token. This is a token that fluctuates with the market and basically allows players to legally buy gold from other players through a token trade. The way this works is a player can pay $20 for a WoW token, then sell it on the auction house for a current market value. Right now it's about 225,000 gold. On the other side of the market, a player can use the in-game gold to buy the token and use it for a month of game time. This trade essentially allows the player to get a month of game time for $20 instead of the normal $15, but without spending anything other than in-game gold, while the other player pays a premium for that gold. So while this does introduce legal currency buying, it does allow for players to play the game for free if they don't have any money to pay for subscription. Now it's a fact that this is a feature of the game. I'll leave it up to you to decide if it's a good feature or not. Many argue that this makes the game pay to win since you can purchase some high-level gear on the auction house, or pay for raid runs. It personally doesn't bother me as I've known friends to play exclusively for free using this system. As for me, I'll hoard my gold. I've already briefly talked about making money on the auction house and market board, and we don't really need to get into that huge topic. What I want to talk about is how these systems are handled and website-assisted usage of these systems. Recently, Warcraft merged parts of their auction house region-wide for commodities, so that's things like ore, flowers, gems, flasks, etc. Non-stackable items like gear will remain realm-specific. For these items, you cannot purchase them from other realms. There's multiple websites for tracking auction house patterns, but I like the Undermine Journal. This website allows you to see selling patterns like the best time of day to sell, and a pricing heat map so you know if the price of something you're buying is too high or too low and you should jump on it, all while out of the game. Now over on FF14, the market board can be handled a little differently. There's a website called Universalis that gives similar item stats to the Undermine Journal. The biggest difference is using it to check other server prices. This is because FF14 allows for the travel to other servers and does not restrict using the market board while phased. So your server may have a minion selling for 10,000 gil, whereas another might have it for 3,000. In Warcraft, you can see this information from the Undermine Journal, but you can't do anything about it. While in Eorzea, just travel to the place with the best deal. Now this can cause some headaches for your local server, but we are a selfish people, and we want the best deal. As for being on the selling side, good luck. While I'm not considered rich in either game, I do have millions in both games, and I feel like a million goes much further at Warcraft, but maybe over time I'll make up the difference and get a lot more gil. As for the auction house and market board, I find the auction house to be a little easier to use and filter my searches. Now we get into a huge area of the game, dungeons and raids. As mentioned before, every dungeon in Final Fantasy is required as you progress through the MSQ. In Warcraft, almost every dungeon is optional except for a couple specific storylines or quests. I'll get to combat in a bit. Right now I just briefly want to look at dungeons themselves. Looking at Warcraft and FF14, they both share a similar progression style. Kill some mobs until you reach each boss, and progression is tracked on the side. Maybe it's just in my experience, but the biggest difference I've noticed is survivability if key players go down. If the tank goes down in FF14 during mob fights, you're pretty likely to die. If the tank goes down in a boss fight, you're almost certain to die. In Warcraft, if the tank goes down in ad fights, you're unlikely to die as long as the healer is paying attention. Similarly, in a boss fight, one of your DPS can typically hold the boss's attention while you finish burning them down. I've tanked many dungeon bosses on my DPS warrior over the years. FF14 also has a unique encounter type that belongs somewhere between dungeons and raids, which are trials. You will find these throughout the MSQ progression. Trials are completed by a group of 4 players early on, but after level 50 increases to 8 players. When you queue and teleport in, you'll find yourself face to face with the boss. No ads, no path, just boss. These are typically pretty easy encounters as long as your group isn't reckless. There's other videos out there comparing dungeons, so we don't need to dig very deep in this area. I mainly just wanted to touch on survivability and balance. I will add that if you leveled in Warcraft through PvP or questing and never touched dungeons, you can always go back and do them, whereas in FF14, again, they are required as you level. Warcraft has 4 difficulty ratings: Normal, Heroic, Mythic, and Mythic Plus. Increasing in difficulty increases everything from mob and boss health to additional boss abilities. Each difficulty will have specific gear level requirements. As you move into Mythic Plus, you can earn keys to go into higher level dungeons. Affixes are additional mechanics that get added at specific key levels of Mythic Plus climbing. Affixes include things like Tyrannical, which give bosses more health and damage, Raging, which increases the damage output of low health mobs, or Quaking, which causes periodic shockwaves under all players, dealing damage and interrupting allies, requiring you to spread out. These affixes are set game-wide on a week-by-week basis. I've had some experience with Mythic Plus dungeons, but not as much as others. They can definitely be challenging but rewarding. When it comes to Final Fantasy dungeons, it's a little different. There's 2 different difficulties, Normal and Hard. Or is there? As you complete dungeons throughout the MSQ, you'll find dungeons of the same name as previous ones, but with Hard added to the name. These are basically continuing the story of the previous dungeon of the same name, providing new story, encounters, and bosses, even adding new sections to explore within the same dungeon. I've seen players refer to these as Part 2 rather than a hard mode, as the difficulty of the dungeon is level appropriate. There's also increased trial difficulties, adding Extreme, which makes the boss more powerful with additional abilities, and Unreal, which is mechanically identical to Extreme but scaled to a higher level. Raiding is where you get the biggest group of players taking on the biggest challenges. Similar to dungeons, I'm not going to list out specific raids, but instead the formation of the raids. In Warcraft, raiding used to be done by groups of 10 or 25 until they introduced flex raiding, which changed the raid to adjust to groups from 10 up to 30. WoW has 4 difficulties: Raid Finder, Normal, Hard, and Mythic, each one increasing in difficulty and mechanics. Raid Finder is the most user-friendly version, and you can typically tackle it without knowing much about the fight, though depending on the expansion and the boss, it may take a couple wipes. The plus side is that Raid Finder uses similar encounters to higher difficulty, just with fewer mechanics, so you can use them to learn more about the fights or to experience the story with less stress. FF14's raid difficulties are Normal and Savage, though they do offer a selection of Alliance raids and Ultimate raids as well. Normal, Savage, and Ultimate raids are completed as a group of 8, whereas Alliance raids are a group of 24. It goes without saying that as you go up in difficulty, the encounters will get much harder and require more planning and coordination. But a big difference in FF14 is the Alliance raid. It's a much easier encounter that is completely different from the other raids. One important detail is that the equipment drops in Alliance raids are meant as catch-up gear, and the final boss drops a coin that can be exchanged for Tombstone gear upgrade materials. The most important thing is that both games offer a variety of challenges to grow into, as well as introductory level difficulty encounters for more casual players. As far as standard raiding, originally Warcraft made things a little bit more difficult with the requirement of 10 to 25 players, but with the introduction of flex raiding, it made things a little easier. FF14's 8-player groups are much easier to put together, but can quickly fill up and leave people left out. The biggest difference is that when comparing the easier raids, being Raid Finder in WoW and Alliance raids in FF14, Raid Finder is the same raid, just clocked down, so you can learn from it or just experience the story, but FF14's casual-friendly raid is a completely different encounter. Dungeon and raid mechanics are handled differently between the two games. Warcraft and FF14 use similar area of effect powers, cone attacks, and push effects, though there's one big difference for me, and I've said it many times: immersion. In Warcraft, the indicator for a pull-in effect by a boss might be a giant swirling blue circle, a cone attack might be black fog, or falling debris could be sparkling red circles all over the floor depending on the boss's powers. What's my point here? Well, in FF14, all of these things are giant colored blobs. They all look the same. That's not to say FF14 fights are without color, but all the attack indicators are usually orange with giant arrows. Here's why I think this is important. Warcraft gets a lot of flack for the necessity of add-ons in dungeons and raids, namely deadly boss mods, which gives warnings about key attacks like running away or stacking up. Now in Final Fantasy, like it or not, it's kind of built into the game mechanics in a form of huge colored arrows and sound effects. Instead of an add-on telling you to stack, they use the biggest indicator markers you will ever see. The reason this is a problem for me, and I stress for me, is that when I'm running an FF14 dungeon, I'm less engaged in what the boss is doing, and I'm just watching for the next giant orange indicator, and that comes back to immersion. Swapping the color and effect appropriate powers for big markers that always look the same takes me out of the experience. I do have to acknowledge the benefit of these orange markers, which is that it makes every new dungeon or raid a little more accessible to players, since while they may not know the fight, they know what to watch for. Lastly, while Warcraft does have some colorful spell effects, in FF14 if you leave it on the default settings, it's a bit much of a light show and can get confusing. WoW and FF14 have both added progression-style dungeons in recent content. On the FF14 side, you have Variant and Criterion dungeons. Variants can be done with a group of 1 to 4 with no role restrictions. As you work your way through, there will be branching paths that change your encounters, and the choices you make will have an effect on the boss's powers. This dungeon type also offers variant actions. Since there's no role restrictions, variant actions help make up for team composition by giving you powers that you normally wouldn't have, like Cure and Rampart if you need some healing or mitigation. One downside is that with a quick Google search, you can find a guide for all 12 routes and 5 bosses. So if you want random encounters, don't look them up, or maybe this one isn't for you. The other type is Criterion, which is similar to Variants but much more difficult. You'll need a standard party for this one, and instead of choosing which way to go, the path is fixed. Criterion dungeons also offer a Savage difficulty which has its own rules to it, along with being even more difficult. WoW's progression dungeons come in the form of Torghast, which is designed to be random in shape and encounters, though you will find similar themes when running the same wing, of which there are 6. The paths and encounters will change each time you run them. When you choose a wing and difficulty, you will load in and find an anima cell waiting for you. When selecting the anima cell, you will have a choice of a random selection of powers, including simple ones like an increase in health and crit power, to fun ones like a constant AoE of fire around you dealing damage to everything you touch, to crazy ones like a chance to emit arcane damage that can turn your enemies into inanimate household objects, killing them instantly. There's a massive list of these powers that can help make each run even more unique. Saving souls also increases your primary stat and stacks with every soul saved. Anima cells can be found randomly throughout the dungeon, and some enemies have a chance to spawn them, and as you kill enemies and loot them, you'll gather a special currency used only in Torghast, which is used at vendors in the run for things like additional specific anima powers and some cosmetics to use in your transmogs. Both have options for unique dungeons, but if you're looking for more of a random and sometimes chaotic experience, I'd recommend giving Torghast a try. I honestly can't say too much here to close this area, as I've done Mythic Plus and raiding in Warcraft, but I haven't experienced as much in FF14. I will say that looking at general dungeons and mechanics, which are used everywhere, even in the open world, I personally prefer the style in Warcraft because the mechanics feel more natural and immersive. I've already talked about the mechanics of the game, but I want to get into a few other details of combat, like how they feel and can change. I'll jump right into my issue here. I don't like combos. I know not all FF14 jobs utilize combos, but most do as far as I've seen. When I'm on my Reaper, it's very 1, 2, 3 and you can't use certain powers at the wrong time or they do basically no damage. For me, that's a big issue in general combat. In Warcraft, I can use whatever powers I want, when I want. Yes, there are some proc classes that rely on RNG, but you can still open with a hard cast of those powers for big damage versus waiting for instacast procs. The important thing is that you have that choice. Plus, I'd rather have a proc-based class that has its ups and downs than a class that feels like you could macro a minute of auto-fighting. I feel there's much more freedom in combat for most classes in Warcraft versus the couple in FF14 with more freedom like the Bard. Another issue that I mentioned before is combat dismounting. I know it's a first world problem, but having to manually dismount before fighting every single time is awful. I honestly don't see why they can't add a feature where using a melee or ranged ability in range will dismount you, but maybe I'm alone there. When it comes to customizing your powers, only one of these two offers it: Warcraft. With FF14, what you see is what you get and there's no alterations. Warcraft offers talent trees to get what you want out of your class. Each class will have a general class tree and a specialization tree to add points into. Make your way down each tree and empower your character the way you want, including 3 PvP talents. You can also save builds to either try different ones out or have different builds for specific encounters like single target for raids or multi-target for dungeons. Another fun way to alter your gameplay in Warcraft is unique gear items. Some bonuses can be on items like weapons and other pieces, but most will be on trinkets. There's a ton of trinkets that have different on-use or proc abilities. Some examples being a fluctuating haste buff, a chance to cast a random shadow bolt, or an on-use ability that unleashes flames on your target. These are a fun way to change up your gameplay style and add some extra flavor to your damage output. There's something really satisfying when a special trinket ability procs and takes a huge chunk out of your target. For me, this is an area where Warcraft really shines. There's so much more freedom in playing how you want and adding extra flavor to your character with customizing powers and special abilities from gear. Now let's jump into leveling, where the experience is extremely different between the two games. When you first make your character, you'll be sent to a starting area based on certain criteria. In FF14, your starting area is determined by your chosen job. In Warcraft, it used to be based on race and faction, but now it's only down to faction. Depending on whether you choose Horde or Alliance, you'll be sent to that faction's main city. I should add one additional detail to this. New players to the game are first sent to a place called Exile's Reach, where you'll go through the first 10 levels and are walked through how to play the game, then sent to their faction's major city. In FF14, if you want to see your friends right away, you'll want to choose jobs that have the same starting city. This isn't a requirement, of course, because you will see your friends after some solo questing. Now, as I said before, the leveling experience is vastly different between WoW and FF14. With Final Fantasy, you can get experience in PvP, fates, and other areas of the game, but you will always find yourself back on the main story questline, known as the MSQ. In this MSQ, there are a set order of quests that you must follow. If you deviate from this, you will not progress in the game until you get back on that train. You will also often encounter required dungeons and trials as you progress through the story. This can be a good thing since you will be forced to run every dungeon and gain some familiarity with them, and you will likely run into them again later at higher levels. This process overall can feel very on the rails and strip you of your freedom of enjoying the leveling experience as you want it to be. In Warcraft, you choose how you want to level. Originally, you would progress through the expansions in order of release, but you had some freedom on choosing which zones to go to and which areas of each zone you wanted to quest in before moving to the next continent. In current WoW, you choose which expansion you want to start in, just in case you have a favorite or an expansion you want to experience fully. Let's say you don't really care to quest. Well, then you have the choice to level exclusively through dungeons. Prefer to fight against the opposing faction? You can level entirely through PvP. This touches back to character identity. Your max level characters are champions, but how did they get to that point? Vanquishing enemies and aiding villagers through questing, or maybe by spilling the blood of their sworn enemies on the battlefield. Each character's journey can be unique and will likely never be exactly the same. It really comes down to choice, and this is very important to me in a game. I don't like being forced through a narrow hallway and into dungeons when I'm still not fully comfortable with my class. I'll keep this one short, but I think it's important as it led to me leaving FF14 for a long time at one point. I wonder if anyone else ran into the same issue. When my wife and I were progressing through the story, we came to a point in patch 5.3 where the next quest is called In the Name of the Light. You pick it up from the manager of suites. This is where the quest line led us, however we couldn't pick up the quest as it was red and locked. We even used the wiki page to follow the quest progression to make sure we were in the right place, and we were. When talking to the quest giver, he says that in order to undertake the quest we must first complete the Crystal Tower quest series. Then he says we can review our progress under the Chronicles of a New Era, the Crystal Tower, in our journal. I opened my journal and guess what? It's not listed anywhere. Chronicles of a New Era is not under any area of the journal. Looking at the FF14 Eorzea database website, it seems to list a series of level 50 quests in Mordana. Asking others, it was mentioned to us that we may need to run some Alliance raid, but none of this was very clear in the game itself. Why should I have to rely on a website to guide me through an on-the-rails experience? As I said before, in Warcraft you can craft your journey as you wish. Get tired of an area, just leave and go somewhere else. You have no freedom in FF14 for things like this. The concept of this really just ate at me, and I ended up unsubbing for quite some time. When it comes to leveling with others, while I've touched on this a little, Warcraft lets you level however you want, whatever level you are. If you're level 37 and your friend is level 23, you can sync down to their level and take on the new zone together, or even complete their quests with them even if you have previously completed them, and still get rewards and proper experience. With FF14 you may run into a few hurdles playing with friends. If you're running different jobs, you will be separated at times to complete job quests. There's also often solo duties that will require you to disband your party and go it alone. As for this next part, I myself haven't done this and have only done some research, but FF14 offers a new Game Plus feature which allows you to run old content again. However, from what I can see, it's much more limited than Warcraft's level sync since it freezes your progress while doing so. You are also restricted from interacting with the market board, some NPCs, and some objects while in this mode. This feels more like replaying a memory kind of thing versus a way to level with friends who are at a different place in the story, since it kicks you out of the new Game Plus mode every time you finish the last quest in any given chapter. Again, I can only speak on the research I've done, but this doesn't feel like a fully fleshed out idea yet and could use some improvement. Looking at some leveling gear in each game, heirlooms are something unique to Warcraft. Heirlooms are basically pieces of specific gear type and slot that can be unlocked or purchased with gold. Their purpose is to be used on your alternate characters while leveling them up. You can equip every slot of gear and that gear will level with you, so you never need to worry about replacing a piece. The thing my family enjoys the most about heirlooms is that when we're all leveling with each other, we can create new characters, equip our heirlooms, set up our new transmog set, and not have to worry about retransmogging new gear until your heirlooms cap out in level depending on how much you have upgraded them. Heirlooms also offer set bonuses, so as you add pieces they have increasing added effects. 2 pieces makes your rested experience last 30% longer. 4 pieces increases your health regeneration while out of combat, reducing the need for food. At 5 pieces, when you level up, you activate a Burst of Knowledge which does a burst of AoE damage and gives you a 40% main stat bonus for 2 minutes, and killing additional enemies grants additional time on this buff. Lastly, at 6 pieces, rested XP consumption is reduced by an additional 30%. Now here's where I'm going to make some enemies, so let's get through this one quickly. Story is not at the top of my list for game requirements. Both games have enjoyable parts of their stories and good characters, but honestly, when I'm playing Warcraft, I don't read the quest details. When playing Final Fantasy, I don't usually watch the cinematics that don't have spoken lines. I just don't like to read that much, so I miss out on a lot, and that's on me. From what I catch in Warcraft, I have enjoyed parts and questioned others. For FF14, I have watched enough anime that I feel like I have seen this Chosen One story before. I'm sorry, I know for others the story section could be half of their video, but for me, it's pretty small in comparison to other areas. For example, I grew up playing the Halo games. Master Chief had an interesting journey and relationship with Cortana, but the overall gameplay and how PvP matchmaking was handled was much more important to me. I know I probably lost some people with that last one, but please keep in mind we all approach gaming in different ways and we look for different things. For me, when it comes to leveling, I like the freedom offered in Warcraft to do it how I want to. Thanks for hanging out. That concludes part 4. Join me for the concluding part 5 where we will discuss playing with friends, PvP, daily activities, community, intuitiveness, child safe, and some final thoughts. I hope to see you then.